Hello and welcome to the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Green Springs Center for Lifelong Learning. I'm Tamara Sheasley-Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about the impacts of mentoring on new Montessori guides and all teachers, and how research backs this up. My guests today are Julia Volkman and Ann Epstein. Julia has been teaching children and mentoring teachers in private and public schools since 1997. She is a faculty member of the Brain Health Initiative, a guest lecturer for Harvard University's Neuroscience of Learning course, and the founder and president of the educational project My Tree Learning. Julia has also written a book on mentoring, which we will link in our show notes, and has a blog post to share with you all. Ann has been a Montessori educator for 45 years. She taught in Children's House for 15 years in both public and independent Montessori settings before becoming a Montessori teacher trainer. Ann is currently the director of early childhood education at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Welcome, Julia and Ann. It is so nice to finally have you both here. I've been so looking forward to this.
We're psyched. I'm psyched to be here.
Absolutely. It's an honor. Thank you for having us.
Oh, absolutely our pleasure. So let's dig right in. First, let's talk about what mentoring actually is. I think people have this concept that they are doing mentoring, and oftentimes they may be missing parts of it or they're confusing it with coaching. So can we help folks have that distinction? What is mentoring?
Yeah, it's similar. And a lot of times in the literature, you'll see that it's used interchangeably with coaching. So it's not really that discrete when you're looking at research. But in our view, we kind of looked at it that coaching is more about helping you improve performance in a specific situation. Like if you were a tennis player or a pickleball player and you wanted to improve your backhand, right? You would get a coach that would help you okay, your backhand is the goal, we'll work on backhand. Right. And the coach would observe you and say, yeah, you're not quite finessing that right. This is how you can fix it. Mentoring is a lot broader than that. Mentoring doesn't really look at you to see what you're doing wrong. Mentoring looks at you to support you in achieving your goals and just being successful overall. So it's much more broad, I would say is the best way to describe it. There's strength-based focus in both.
And I would say also mentoring is oftentimes bringing in new content that you don't even know that you don't know yet. And so that I know that for us, that's been a big piece. Oftentimes the areas that people don't know that they might need support, we come in with some content and that these light bulbs go off.
Yeah. I had a quick flashback when you said that, Tamara. I had the good fortune to work with Eileen Bierman, who was honored at the AMS conference this past March. And she was my mentor early in my career. And I knew about observation, obviously, and I certainly knew about presenting lessons. But she took me aside at one point and she said, Ann, I want to talk to you about something called a working together lesson. And it was how to support a child who needs a little bit of guidance without interfering or interrupting what they were doing. And like you're saying, Tamara, I didn't know that I didn't know that. So I love that you reminded us that that's an important aspect of mentoring.
Well, and I thank you for sharing that, Ann, because you reminded me that Julia actually was my mentor for the Children's House and really getting to know what it meant to lead and operate a children's house. And there was so much that I was not asking that Julia was answering. And because there was a need, right? And so one of the things I still remember, and this was 20 years ago probably now, it was taking some older children into the Children's House classroom. And, we were focused on these kind of more academic, whatever that, and skills. And Julia said, you have to connect them with a large practical life. They've got to build, and like that's just an example of, and gave us the tools and the skills to be able to do that. And all of a sudden these children settled in, right? There was this ability to find their peace and their work cycle. Again, it came out of this, somebody having those skills and being able to step in when we didn't even know we needed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So glad you reminded me of that, Tamara, because that's what we're trying to do. We're all trying to help. Like this is in the field, we're educators. We're intrinsically motivated to be of use and bring about benefit in the world and to help people, realize their potential. And so mentoring kind of gives us this discrete opportunity to do that with adults. Whereas when we're in the classroom with the children, we're just doing it. We're doing it inherently.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the impact of strong mentoring. I will share with you all that we did a study with Anne and Julia, and so talk about our study, talk about the impacts. Let's share that, and then, folks, I want you to know. Then we're going to get into the essential components of effective mentoring and what it takes to be a great mentor. And this is really important because the structure matters. So I'm going to have you all introduce what we've been doing.
So Tamara was wonderful enough to invite me to be a mentor in the amazing Green Spring mentoring program. I was one of the founding mentors, and I decided that if I was going to do it, there was no way I was going to do it without doing research as part of it, because I wanted to make sure that what I thought was working was actually helping. And that's when I went to the amazing Dr. Ann Epstein. I was like, could you help me do this, right? And she was like, yeah, we'll do it. And she's just so supportive. So she was my mentor in that whole part of it, very supportive of that. So we had these different groups that were in the Green Spring Center for Lifelong Learning Mentoring Program was one arm of it. And there was a group of pre-KK, primary Montessori teachers in that group, and a group of elementary teachers in that group who met weekly with us on Zoom with the mentors. So it was a weekly academic year long. We had another group of teachers who I was mentoring at a school out in Idaho, who we met only monthly with them. And I went on site with them twice with the specific goal of focusing on their literacy program. But in the Green Spring program, we were supporting new to title teachers who were new in their classroom in this approach to teaching. So that was the big picture of the different arms of the study. And then we had the control group, thanks to the Montessori Research Pool. If you haven't signed up, please sign up for the Montessori Research Pool, which is what we use to find our control group of people so that we could see how things changed for people who weren't in the mentoring versus people who were in the mentoring program. So that's kind of the big picture of how it was designed. Did I miss anything, Anne?
I think you nailed it.
Okay, and so what did the study show? What were, and I know we don't have final results, so we'll talk about that in a second, but what did the study show that this weekly mentoring, 90 minutes a week, which I know I will share with you, at the beginning, people said, oh my goodness, that's so long. It's so much time every week. It felt like a lot. And in a teacher's world, 1 minute is a long time, let alone 90 minutes. We know that. And in school leaders' world too. But what we found was once people got settled in the program, they showed up. It was a priority because it was so valuable. And can you speak a little bit to the results that you have found so far and what the programs offered?
So we had 19 active participants in this study who were in the mentoring program, and we had 36 people in the control group. It was a multi-method design. So we had qualitative results, which Anne can speak to, which is kind of the feeling, the things that the teachers spoke to in their comments. And then we had quantitative results, which is what I can speak to, which is the data, just the numbers from what the results of all of these different assessment tools that we use throughout the year show. And what we found, and this is, again, we're rerunning all the statistics on it to verify that they're accurate. The results we have at the moment, and they have to be re-verified, are that the mentoring program resulted in significant reductions in all burnout dimensions for mentored teachers, large differences in pre and post change scores between the mentoring group and the control group. So burnout was reduced. also there was an improvement, significant improvements in teacher self-efficacy for the mentor teachers as compared with the control group. And we know that self-efficacy directly contributes to burnout.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. Self-efficacy is it's kind of like self-confidence. It's the belief that you're capable in what you're doing and that you're able to make a difference. And as teachers, that's like what we want to do, right? So having that belief that what you're doing matters, that you're making a difference by your actions. That's basically, in a nutshell, what would you agree, Anne? Is that a good definition? We did see also that anxiety levels significantly decreased in the mentoring group. So I know, right? And what we're all dealing with, anxiety and burnout and all of these things. So those are some of the key statistics. We also looked at teacher reflective practice, how much teachers kind of thought about what they did and weren't intentional about it. And we did see strong improvement in reflective practice scores in the mentoring group versus the control group. And also in the mentoring group's student-oriented beliefs. So the focus on students as opposed to teachers. So having the role, the view that it's not about the teacher at the front of the classroom, it's about the student with the work. So that kind of view that it's dispersed. The learning is really in the student's hands, and it's not about what the teacher's doing as much as what the teacher can guide the students to do. So that's the quantitative side.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the quantitative component of the study is that we had a number of different surveys that our participants completed. And then we looked at what the differences were between the control group and the participant group in their responses to survey questions. And then the part that I worked with the most were their responses to open-ended questions. So we had several open-ended questions that were connected with the surveys, and then we periodically asked them, how are things going? What's working well? What would you say is something that maybe should be changed? So we had those kinds of responses that we could analyze. So should I jump
into
what we found from analyzing those responses?
Sure. Sure. We'd love to hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there were two main things that came out. And this is always exciting for me as a qualitative researcher because you don't know. You kind of think, well, you're hoping that things will be on the positive end, but you really don't know. So one strong theme that emerged was the importance of collaboration. So, as we mentioned, these were Zoom sessions, the weekly ones that were online, and the monthly ones were as well. So this was all online, and it was surprising how valuable the mentees found the opportunity to collaborate, to connect, to listen to one another, to hear what the struggles were of their fellow mentees, to have opportunities to contribute ideas to whatever it was that they were addressing. So that whole idea of working together and developing a community was a pretty strong finding. So that was exciting to see that. The other thing that we found that they talked about a lot in these open-ended responses was how much they appreciated the flexibility to address whatever it was that was difficult for them at that particular time, and to celebrate whatever it was that was going well. So we ended up giving this a name. We called this following the teacher along the same ways that we follow the child. So that, again, was not expected, but when we really looked at all of the coding that we did, all the categorizing that we did with the open-ended responses, those were the two main themes that came out. The importance and the value in collaborating, and then again, what a difference it made for the mentees to feel that whatever they needed was being addressed.
Wow. It really resonates for me because it's following the human spirit,
Yeah,
right? Both of
yeah,
those are about nurturing the spirit of the teacher
yeah.
and of the person, the guide who's in that critical role. And so often that can be stepped over.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both. That's so helpful. Anything else we want to say about the research before we move on?
Just a little thing that I want to put in there about self-efficacy that we'll probably expand on down the road. The importance of positivity. So, when we're mentoring, we are looking to help our mentees develop in a broad range of areas. And sometimes it's tempting to go after what their weaknesses are, what their struggles are, what they're not doing as well with, in a way that might not come across to the mentee as being positive. So we're going to talk about the importance of having a positive approach to assisting mentees with whatever it is that they would like help with.
So what is it that makes a strong mentor?
It's a good question. And I think probably the biggest thing is experience, because with experience comes patience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most challenging thing for the mentors was to have a lot of confidence in the students and our ability to pull it out of them rather than push it into them.
Mm.
Yeah.
And really, really recognize the strengths that were already in the students, that ability to observe for strengths so that we could see their strengths and really focus on those and not get distracted by deficit thinking, which is so prevalent in our culture, that we think always about what's going wrong and not so much about what's going well. So that experience and that ability to observe for strengths, and then a lot of flexibility, because things happen in these sessions. We'd have a plan and we'd show up to the session. Like one time, I remember we showed up and the in the weekly mentoring group, they were in a public school and they had just had this huge layoff. Like 10 minutes before mentoring, they all got this notice that almost everybody in the building next to them was laid off. And like that program was closing. And they were like, we're not closing. We all still have our jobs, but they were in shock. They were in shock. And so we were going to talk about some, lessons to give in this specific curriculum area. And we're like, that is not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about advocacy and how you can speak up for the value in your program to people who are in decision-making roles. And so we just switched quickly. And that flexibility was essential, because other things just kept coming up. Someone had a real big problem with a specific student, and we're like, we need to address that. We're not just going to walk past it and put it off till later. We're going to go for it right there. And so the experience of the mentor and their ability to switch quickly. So even if we didn't have something prepared, we had so much experience that we could speak to it, even without a formal presentation ready.
Yeah. I think kind of along those lines of being able to observe and to be flexible, figuring out a way. This is part of being a reflective practitioner. When you sense that the communication is just not going well, so in the moment, and then also after the session, having that ability to look back and to think about, okay, it felt like things were maybe not connecting in the way that I had hoped that they would connect. So what was it that was happening? What questions do I need to ask? What can I do to address whatever felt like it was not working well? So being that kind of listener and that kind of reflective practitioner, where your focus is really on looking to see what's going well, and if it's not going well, then what can I put in, or what can I take out to make it go better?
Such important, beautiful skills. And one of the terms I've heard used to describe that kind of listening is a trampoline listener. So you're asking the question that helps the person jump even higher into their own experience, which I just thought, right? And being able to, I would also say, I think I really want to underscore having somebody who's experienced in the role, because I think it can be challenging to be mentored or have somebody in that mentoring role who does not actually have those skills for your level, and they don't have that ability to look at the nuances and really understand with that depth that makes such a difference. And I know from working with Julia's come in and worked with my guides before, and you bring that eye for those little details, which really it's been many years and we still talk about things that you shared, but that comes out of that depth of experience. I want to underscore that, because I think oftentimes in schools, there could be somebody who's holding a number of levels and really trying, and levels they may not be trained at, and trying to support people with that. And that level of growth does come out of deep expertise and experience.
Yeah.
It does. And you do want to be able to, have really strong observation skills so that you're observing at your level or whatever level you're working in. A lot of us are stretched to work beyond the levels that we're trained and experienced in. Okay. But it's about scientific observation. Can we go into a classroom and with our key principles for what we're looking for a strong nurturing environment. We're looking for engaging work. We're looking for challenge, inspiration and joy. Right? We're looking for hard work. People are really dedicated to finding the answers to their questions. We want that scientific observation aspect to really guide what we're doing. And all of us mentors, it was really hard for us to be open-ended in our questioning. We had lists. I remember Veronica actually, and I had to have this list of questions open on the screen next to our Zoom screen. So we'd be like, okay, what do we say? How do we do this? Because it's hard. It's not something that we're all innately able to do. And it's okay to, have a scaffold for yourself available so that you can say, all right, let's try this question. Let's try this question while we're learning. Because we were still learning to do this more open-ended approach. It's not what we're typically trained on. I mean, when I was mentoring in public schools, I would go in there and the principal would say, all right, this classroom's terrible. Go fix it, and I would go in there and I would be like, okay. And I would look and I would see everything that was going wrong. And that's what I would focus on. And I say, well, why are you doing it that way? And do you do the lesson this way? And what about this? And I was not strengths-based at all. I was like, those teachers, I'm still friends with them. I don't know how they survived me, but it was awful. I wasn't strengths-based. I wasn't asking the right questions. Even though I still had the right experience, I wasn't asking the right questions to build relationship and to inspire reflective practice on their part, and to be quiet, which I'm not very good at. Hear me talking all the time in this podcast. I'm not very good at being quiet, but to be quiet so that they had the time for the answer to arise within them.
Okay, so give us an example, right? Let's talk of it. Let's have an example. I'm going to give you an example and you can give me some questions, right? Because I think this is the part, right? This is the part where we get into the meat for people, and it helps us to think. Okay, so I'm a young guide, and I have a child who I invite to lessons every day, and they say, no, I don't want to go to that lesson. And they go back to the same work over and over. And this work is not challenging them. And so help us, like, what questions, how do you support that from a place of positivity?
Well, what is that child really interested in? Like what is driving that child to make it? What are their strengths that they're trying to play to? Because we're all trying to work towards our strengths, right? Innately, subtly. And so what is it about that situation that they go to? Are they always taking the work and doing it next to a certain child? Like, is it really the other child that they're interested in and they're just using the work as a proxy to be near them? Are they interested in relationship, right? What is it that's driving them? So the most important thing is to ask yourself and observe that child to understand what's interesting to them. And then use that interest to connect them to the work that would be more challenging or appropriate, that you think would be more helpful for them in the long run.
Yeah, and sometimes the interest is not necessarily something that's on the shelf, but if the child is moving around the classroom quite a bit, oh, well, there we go. This is a child who likes to move. So what kind of lessons could I suggest that have more movement? So could I ask the child to work with the color tablets, and we are going to go around the room and find an item that's red, and we'll bring it back to the rug. So what are some opportunities that that are based on your observations of who this child is? So I think that's another way to look at that really important question of what do we know about this child, and what are some things that we've observed that are characteristic, and then build on that.
And this brings up something really important that we haven't touched on yet in the whole program, is that we didn't observe these teachers in their classrooms until, like, what was it, January, February, March? It was later in the year, and we didn't observe everybody. It was optional that they could Zoom, FaceTime us into their room, and some of them like had carried it around with them. Some of them just put it down and watched this, like the snack area was bananas in one classroom. They're like, help me with snack. And so they just put the phone there. We hadn't observed the teachers. So all of this was based specifically on what they were offering, right? And what they were talking about. This made us very non-judgmental, because we hadn't been in there and saying, I know what's really going on. Because when you're teaching going, you're like, oh my gosh, they have to work on this. And we weren't like that at all. That was actually a gift to us, because our bias could have very much gotten in our way. And it wasn't until much longer into the program where we already had strong relationships that we actually saw their classrooms. And the mentors, we got together, we're like, oh my gosh, like we should have been talking about this, the whole time. But it didn't matter, because it helped them in their practice, and it was actually beneficial for us. But after that, so getting to what Ann was talking about, after those observations, we'd talk with them and we'd say, okay, we talk about what we saw. But the first question, oftentimes the teacher was concerned about one child in particular, like, watch this child. I don't understand this child things are weird. And so the first question that we'd ask after would be like, okay, what are this child's strengths?
Yeah.
And most of the time, the teachers all went, oh, that's a really good question. And they hadn't thought about it until they were prompted to.
Love that. Love that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think our listeners will appreciate. And if we have time at the end, we're going to come back and do a few more scenarios and just have you all just drop wisdom. That's what we're going to do.
Drop questions so that your wisdom will come
that's
out.
Right.
It's just about
that's
the
right.
questions.
Well, I think the question is the wisdom. I mean, that's really what's extraordinary here, is that the self-discipline and the self-knowledge and the wisdom that is required, and the patience to ask the question and let the person come to their own answer and work through it and have that opportunity. That's the gift. What you're really describing is being a Montessori guide or a teacher, a strong teacher in the role of the mentor, where you're asking those guiding questions and letting them have their own epiphany moments.
But the guiding questions, you're not on your own. There's a book. You can get the book, Evocative Coaching by Shannon Morin and Shannon Morin. It's a killer book. And we were just like writing down all the questions from that book so that we had our cheat sheet of questions to ask. That you don't have to start from scratch. You're not alone in this. You're not alone. And coaching, they call it evocative coaching. And again, there's that nuance, between mentoring and coaching, which isn't clearly defined in the literature. But there's a lot of overlap. You can actually go become certified to be a coach because it is a set of skills that you're describing, Tamara, that you need to be patient. You need to follow this kind of structure of how do you get into the depth of everything that you want to cover so that it comes out from the student or, from the mentee, from the coachee, instead of from, this top-down approach, and that's why we had a really specific format that we had to follow. But again, you're not on your own. Get the book, Evocative Coaching, and it's all school-based coaching, that book. It's fantastic. Really, really helpful.
I love that. I'm getting
There
it.
we go.
I'm getting that one. Because you also had used, I think it was called psychological coaching. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
As you built the model.
Margaret Moore, who's kind of the grandmother of, or I don't know, what do you say for a woman? You'd say the godfather or grandfather.
Matriarch.
But you say matriarch.
There we
matriarch, go. Or the leader. I just want to say leader. Get the gender out of it. She's an amazing
That's right.
leader in the world of coaching. And she's done so much research into what coaching works. And she's a big part of the coaching certification movement and how you can get educated to really do it effectively and well. And so she's got some great books, but they're like textbooks that are a little less, they're you gotta want it to get to those textbooks. Coaching, you can skim and find what you need if you're not ready to dig into the whole thing.
Well, so let's talk about the essential components of an effective mentoring program. What are we really looking for that make it effective?
All right, Julia, jump in because there was a format that was carefully planned and pretty much followed. So I think it would be really helpful for people to know what the components are in that format.
Yeah, and it wasn't intuitive for us. So in some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't. So the first thing was we divided up each session by percentages of the time we were going to do different things. And the first thing we always did was open with positivity, which is not easy, right? Opening with positivity. And we had a list of questions, a bazillion questions we could ask. Tell me a story about something that went well this week in your classroom. How did you feel? When did you feel joy? Tell us something that made you smile this week in your classroom, or something. So we had this list of questions to really encourage that, when you first start a call or a meeting with someone, there's usually a few minutes of just like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And it's informal. We formalized it. So we were checking in with a focus towards positivity. So it was our check-in time so we could all say, hey, how's everybody doing? What's going on? And talk about anything that came up, but trying to guide it towards positivity. That was about 10% at the beginning of each session. Sometimes it went longer because there was stuff going on. So that had to change. The next part of the meeting was about 20% of the time we were reviewing their goals. So every week we were setting SMART goals and we were holding them accountable, not by us policing their goals, but by talking about them every week and saying, so how's it going with your goals? And at the end of the session, sometimes we talk about those goals so people were in touch with what other people's goals were. So they'd be like, oh, I wanted to hear, because I want that goal maybe next week. And so this conversation about how is it going? What's in your way? What worked? How does that influence you? And then we would do about 45% of the time we would present content. And the content that we presented was specifically based on what we were observing in the previous week. Specifically. So it wasn't just like, the first few weeks we had to decide, okay, well, we've got to cover this just to get things started. But then after that, we really tried to be flexible. We had a lot of ideas on what they would need in the new to title group. And so we had stuff that we just prepared and we're like, yeah, we'll pull that out at some point. But we didn't always know when we'd pull it out. We kind of followed them. So that was the content. Then we had what's called the generative moment. And this is when we ask really open-ended questions to lead the mentees to discuss specific situations in their classroom that were coming up based on the content. So we tried to guide them. It wasn't just, sometimes they stayed very close to the content and what they were talking about. Sometimes it was out of left field what they came up with because there was something pressing for them that wasn't related to, we talked about language or we talked about practical life, and that wasn't what it was for them. So there was a generative moment. This is one of the most important parts of the session, where you guide them to come up with what really matters to them. And then you follow up by smart goal setting, by setting your goals for the next week or for the next month, depending on how long your interval is. So quietly, just stop. Everybody stops talking. You take 5% of your time for the mentees to just record their goals, write it down. And then last 5 minutes, closing with positivity. Again, just feeling like, oh, well, this was great and this happened today and we're making progress and things are happening. And yeah, this is tough, but overall, closing with positivity. And so that was the main structure. Those are the main aspects of each session. We followed that for each session.
I just want to add a couple things because I co-led I still co-lead the leadership mentoring community with Cassie Mackey, and we really try to start with what's going well, which we got from the psychological coaching book. And it's changed all of my meetings now, because now all of my meetings start with what's going well, because she says it really makes a difference for the brain to look for, we have this negativity bias you were talking about. So the brain has to look for, oh my gosh, what are the things that are going well? Because I've been stewing on this thing that I'm struggling with. And it really sets a different framework for the whole session. So I just wanted to really underscore that. And it also follows Dan Coyle's Culture of Belonging, talks about how there's a connection activity at the beginning of each gathering. And so often we want to jump into things without really connecting. And it's such a beautiful way to connect and build in that connection while also activating the positive part of the brain. And so I just wanted to underscore that and share that piece. The other thing I just wanted to elaborate on just briefly is the SMART goals were always small.
Yes.
And really easily attainable so that you could have that experience of, I did it, right? I did my goal. Because so often, I'm going to lose 20 pounds or whatever are our goals, and they're so massive. And so they have to be easily attainable, right? Yeah. Anything else you want to add about any of that?
But one thing with the goals, Tamara, is that we might give little examples, like maybe based on what we talked about, your goal this week is to reread your lesson in your album on this, or maybe your goal is to, practice that lesson with your co-teacher, or, so we gave them some examples in that generative moment of possibilities of things that might work that were really achievable, and this talking about it together, the SMART goals review, we talked about it together. So we were just like, oh, that, the other ones were like, is that realistic? Is that, they would question each other, like, don't kill yourself, girl, that's too much. And so that really supported that community aspect that Anne was talking about, really made a difference in helping people understand what was achievable and what wasn't. So the mentors didn't have to be, they don't have to be the big overriding, well, that's not realistic. They could be like, they could open it up and say, what do you guys think? Is that a goal that, sounds good to you? And, get them talking about it.
Yeah, I think that piece that you mentioned, Tamara, about making it a small, achievable goal, initially, I think people get worried about goal setting. And when they realize, oh, we're talking about having a focus, having an end that is really going to make you feel better because you were able to achieve it. That's the whole purpose. That's what we're all about when we're setting these goals that are SMART. So maybe it would be giving a lesson in an area of the curriculum that you haven't really had time or maybe not interest in, having that be a goal. So narrowing that down, what is a particular area of the curriculum where you might consider giving a lesson to the whole class, to a small group, to an individual child, and making it something that you're pretty sure that you would be able to achieve. So I think that's a big key. And in the open-ended responses, there were that was one of our minor themes that participants really appreciated how good they felt when they looked at the end of the week and they achieved whatever that goal was that they set for themselves.
Well, and I think we had them set two, right? Usually it's one from kind of their own practice and one from any content that was presented. And it's amazing how as human beings we can be resistant to that,
Yep.
right? To that
Yep.
process.
Well,
And
because we're afraid we won't do it.
that's right. And it's another thing just to add to the list, right?
Right.
And creating this positive experience for people where they get to be successful,
Right.
and have that experience of success. I think that really added, my guess is, and I'm not a researcher yet, right? We should all not be a researcher
we'll get
yet.
you involved, Tamara.
But I think that we all can have that experience of needing someone to help us break it down a little so that we can have that success.
Yeah.
And especially in a role that can feel like things can be going beautifully and there's still things that you're always working on.
Yeah.
We're holding
Yeah.
these children as beloved and sacred and tending to them and looking for their spirits and all those things. And it's a lift.
Yeah.
So having those successes is really important.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. So what else do you all want to make sure that our people get to hear about before we wrap up?
I want to say that it's not about policing the teachers. And a lot of times this is a trap we fall into in our classrooms with students. And when we're coaching or mentoring, that we're like, okay, I've got to hold these teachers accountable for all this stuff. And you are holding them accountable to themselves when you're a mentor. You don't have something outside that you're holding. It's they're accountable to themselves. And that's like the whole shift, is that you're really holding them so that they are happy with what they're doing. Like they're actually making effort, and they recognize it. I don't have to. And we didn't police anybody's SMART goals. We would check in every once in a while, right? If they wrote them down in a way we could find them. Some of them just wrote them in notebooks though. We couldn't see them because we were virtual. And it was okay because it wasn't for us, it was for them. And I think that's the big paradigm shift, is that a lot of times, especially if you're a coach at a school, administration is saying, well, our scores are terrible and we've got to fix this, or something like that. And they're like, you've got to go do it. And then you're like, oh, you've got this big weight on you to fix it. So you don't feel like you have the freedom to allow the mentees to kind of make mistakes and fix them, which is when we're working with children. Of course we do. It's so easy for us to do it with children and so hard for us to do it with grown-ups. We're not nearly, I don't know, for me anyway, I'm not nearly as flexible with adults as I am with little kids,
Is that because we think, okay, so in my head, I'm thinking, aren't the stakes higher? I mean, really, like with the child, they're self-constructing, they've got time. If you're working, let's say you have a guide or a teacher who's really struggling with classroom management, right? And their children they're nowhere near normalized. It's January when usually children come back and they're settling in and there's such a beautiful work cycle, and it's January and they're bouncing off the walls.
Yeah.
So what's our approach there as we're really stepping in and supporting these guides as they're getting their sea legs or they've been in the model for several years and are still struggling with that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got just one or two things that might be helpful to remind ourselves about. Um, it's not going to happen overnight when it's a big situation like classroom management. But if we come back to that idea of looking for a specific area that could be addressed in a fairly short amount of time, and doing that from a strength-based approach. So looking for maybe there's an area of the classroom that is better, that's working better than some other area, and what is it about that particular area? Maybe it's the gathering when you bring everybody together. The kids look forward to that. That part of the day is going pretty well. So what is it that you're doing to make that part of the day go well? Maybe it's the relationships that you have with the kids during that time that, oh my gosh, I'm really tuned into them. And maybe I've gotten to the point where I'm not tuning in and connecting with the kids in that same way during the work period. So I think remembering those two components, that we need to approach it from a what's working well, where are the strengths, just like we do with the kids, and then how can we build on that? And then also remembering that small steps do make a difference, and we're not going to be able to take care of a big area like classroom management immediately. It'll be a process.
Love that. Thank you, Anne. Really, I
Sure.
really appreciate that perspective, and really, just like we do with the children, focusing on the strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you need to counsel people out. Sometimes they're in the
Yeah.
wrong role. Even if you're the best mentor in the world, sometimes people are in the wrong role. That's okay. It's not a problem. It's just not the right match. And it's okay that that's the situation.
Yeah.
But if you feel like, no, they just need time, they're going to get it, then you just like Anne said, you want to encourage them and you want to help them think about what's to work with who's willing. A lot of times I think it's fear in us that we're like, oh my gosh, I have to control all this behavior because the kids are bananas, and you feel all this pressure, like I have to control it. And so you just totally do the wrong thing. You always go to the hardest kid. The kids who who do the work, you're ignoring them because you're 100% focused on the kid who's always under the table or, whatever they're doing. And so you can't get to the kids who want it. Go to the kids who are willing. Once you get them concentrated, it's about the community. The children will teach each other. The teachers will teach each other. And that's what Anne was speaking about in this study. We saw that the teachers taught each other. And
Yeah.
there's one teacher I remember in particular who she described things in her classroom. And I'm like, I would go nuts if I went in that classroom. Everything was bananas. The kids were under the tables. Nobody was working. It was like they were running around. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm trying to support her. And it didn't feel like things were changing, For the first several months, it didn't feel like the reports from her were the same. And then at some point, and we didn't stop her from, like, sometimes she would overshare and really focus on the problems. And we just slowly guided her. By the end of the academic year, everyone was asking her their questions. All of the other teachers were like, what would you do if this happened? And she's like, well, and her wisdom started to come out. Like, it was beautiful to see, and it was hard to be patient
Yeah.
with that. Really hard to be patient
Ooh,
with
that
that.
gives me chills, Julia. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of a little phrase that way back in my undergrad years, I thought I wanted to be a speech pathologist. So this was in one of my speech path classes. And the professor said, don't bombard the deficit. So if there's something that's not working, again, our tendency is to glom onto that and just press hard and try to figure out what is it that we can do to make this better right away. And sometimes by focusing a little bit too much on what's going wrong, we're not going to make it better. So we do need to remember there's always something that's working well, and we need to acknowledge what that is and do the best we can to see how can we connect what's working well to the areas that do need attention, and to give it time, figure out what are those small steps, do our task analysis, and work at it step by step.
Yeah, and start with who's willing.
Yes.
Start with
yes.
who's willing, because it will
Yes.
cascade out. You don't have to crack the hard nut, because the community will crack that nut.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be you.
Yeah.
Look at you all dropping wisdom. That's what that's so beautiful. My bucket is so full. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you for all the work you're doing to help have Montessori be seen for its brilliance and its really exceptionality through research, and yet still bringing compassion and love and having those all be married. It's beautiful, the work that you're doing. We're so grateful.
But that's what Montessori is. And a lot of us are like in denial that we're scientists. But we're all, if we're working in Montessori, we are all scientists, because we're trained on scientific observation.
Yeah.
That is what we're doing every day. We're collecting data. We're getting our judgment out of our observations so that we can make intelligent decisions based on what's actually happening, instead of what we might be afraid is happening or might assume is happening. That's why we're all scientists. And this is my soapbox. We are all scientists. Start thinking of yourself as a scientist, for goodness sake. This is not a guru model. She didn't want it to be called the Montessori method. She wanted to be called scientific pedagogy, because that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said, Julia. Thank you.
I'm so grateful for you both. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I actually have to tell you, you get to be here for something very special today. We have a super fan who has been listening to all of our episodes, and she is turning 10 years old today. So a shout out to Melody, who's in a Montessori classroom in Virginia, and insists to her mother that she gets to listen to our podcast to and from school every day. And so,
really,
yes, happy birthday,
That's
Melody.
wonderful. Oh gosh, I'm honored, and thank
birthday,
you
Melody.
for listening. That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah, she's
what a
inspired
gift.
me.
Thank you both. And a special thank you to our listeners. We're so grateful for you and all the work that you are doing.
Yes.
It is the work to make our world a peaceful, harmonious world where every person gets to be their full self, their full actualized self. Keep on keeping on. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And as Dr. Montessori told us, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We're in this together. Thank you. I want to make sure that listeners know that the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning offers academic year-long mentoring communities that have been highly successful and proven by research to be effective. Make sure to check us out.